The hum of the city was a constant, almost comforting backdrop to the escalating crisis unfolding within David Sterling's empire. He was a self-made millionaire, a titan in the hospitality industry, a name synonymous with innovation and success. Yet here he stood, not in the plush, air-conditioned confines of his top-floor office, but on the precipice of a decision that would redefine his understanding of leadership, and perhaps himself. His crown jewel, a chain of upscale American diners, was faltering, and one particular branch, the Golden Spoon, located in the very heart of this bustling metropolis, was bleeding money and reputation at an alarming rate. David, a man in his late 30s, possessed a sharp mind, an almost uncanny ability to predict market trends, and a passion for food and service that had fueled his rise from humble beginnings. He had built his empire on the belief that a restaurant wasn't just a place to eat, but an experience, a sanctuary. But somewhere along the line, that vision had blurred. Reviews for the Golden Spoon were scathing, a litany of cold food, rude service, interminable waits, and a general air of disinterest. Staff turnover had reached epidemic proportions, a revolving door of hopefuls quickly extinguished by an invisible force. David had tried everything from corporate mandates to incentive programs, but nothing had stemmed the tide. The deeper he delved into spreadsheets and reports, the more amorphous the problem seemed. It was like trying to catch smoke. He felt a profound sense of personal failure, a betrayal of the very principles he had founded his business upon. This wasn't merely a financial setback. It was an existential threat to his entire brand, a rot that, if left unchecked, could fester and consume everything he had painstakingly built. The Golden Spoon wasn't just a restaurant. It was a symbol, and its tarnishing reflected poorly on his once gleaming reputation. He paced his expansive office, the panoramic cityscape indifferent to his turmoil. He had always been a man of action, not one to delegate complex problems away. But this problem felt different. It was insidious, veiled behind layers of corporate distance and filtered reports. He couldn't fix what he couldn't truly see, couldn't understand. The solution, he realized with a jolt that was both terrifying and exhilarating, lay not in more numbers or strategic overhauls from afar, but in stepping back into the trenches. He needed to get his hands dirty, to breathe the same air, face the same frustrations, and witness the rot up close. He needed to become invisible. The idea, once formed, took root with the tenacity of a weed. He would disguise himself, shed his identity as David Sterling, the millionaire CEO, and become just another new hire, a fresh face navigating the chaos of the Golden Spoon. He would walk among his employees, serve his customers, and experience firsthand the systemic failures that were dragging his beloved business into the abyss. It was a gamble, a risky venture that could backfire spectacularly if he was discovered. But the alternative, watching his dream crumble from a distance, was far worse. He knew it wouldn't be easy. His hands, accustomed to signing contracts and swiping credit cards, would ache from carrying trays. His mind, trained in high-level strategy, would have to adapt to the minutiae of placing an order and refilling water glasses. But the challenge excited him. He yearned for the raw, unfiltered truth, the kind that only surfaces when you're truly embedded in the everyday struggle. He wanted to understand why his staff was so disengaged, why the food was so consistently poor, why the customers felt so unwelcome. He wanted to uncover the deep-seated problems that reports couldn't capture, the human element that formal reviews failed to convey. Was it poor training, demotivated management, a toxic work culture? He suspected it was a cocktail of all three, a recipe for disaster, The suspense was almost unbearable. What would he find? Would it be worse than he imagined? Or would there be glimmers of hope, unsung heroes struggling against the tide? He steeled himself for whatever truths awaited him. This wasn't just about saving a restaurant. It was about reconnecting with the very essence of what he believed in, about reigniting the spark that had once made the golden spoon truly golden. He was about to embark on an extraordinary journey, shedding the gilded cage of his success to confront the reality of his failing enterprise, armed with nothing but a desire to understand and a willingness to work from the ground up. He would become a ghost in his own machine, a silent observer in the very place he owned, waiting for the moment when the truth would reveal itself, whatever painful form it took. The stage was set, the disguise pending, and the fate of the golden spoon hung precariously in the balance. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories. The transformation was more than just a change of clothes. It was an immersion into an entirely new persona. David, the sharp-suited owner, meticulously crafted Mark, an ordinary, slightly awkward new server. He spent hours in front of a mirror, practicing a slump in his shoulders, a hesitant glance, and a more unassuming walk. His expensive watch was replaced by a cheap, functional one, his tailored shirts by ill-fitting polos. He even practiced a regional accent he'd heard from some of his less polished employees, softening his naturally authoritative tone. The backstory he'd concocted was simple yet believable. Mark, a recent transplant to the city, seeking a fresh start after a string of unremarkable jobs. He'd rehearsed conversations, anticipating questions about his past, aiming for a blandness that wouldn't draw undue attention. This wasn't just about fooling his staff. It was about truly inhabiting the role, believing in Mark enough to blend seamlessly into the restaurant's chaotic ecosystem. He needed to be invisible, a fly on the wall, to truly understand the rot that had set in. The success of his restaurant empire and his personal pride hinged on this elaborate deception. When Mark finally arrived for his first day at the Golden Spoon, the carefully constructed facade immediately faced its biggest test. The doors swung open to reveal not the vibrant, bustling establishment he envisioned, but a scene of palpable dysfunction. The air was thick with the smell of stale grease and something vaguely acrid, a stark contrast to the fresh aromas he insisted upon in his other successful ventures. The energy was low, almost stagnant. Servers shuffled rather than walked, their faces etched with boredom or thinly veiled resentment. Plates clattered too loudly in the kitchen, not with the rhythm of efficiency, but with the frustration of disorganization. He saw a busboy idly wiping down an already clean table, deliberately avoiding eye contact with a customer who was clearly trying to get his attention for a refill. The manager, a portly man named Gary with a perpetually harried expression, barked orders into a phone, oblivious to the growing queue at the hostess stand. David, as Mark felt a wave of despair wash over him, immediately confirming his worst fears. The problem wasn't just superficial. It was systemic, deeply ingrained in the very fabric of the establishment. This wasn't merely a business struggling. It was a living entity, slowly dying from within. Amidst this visible disarray, a flicker of something different caught his eye. A new waitress, her movements quick and purposeful despite an undeniable air of exhaustion, navigated the treacherous path between tables. This was Sarah. Her uniform, though standard issue, seemed to hang on her slightly, suggesting recent acquisition, and her attempts at organization, though earnest, were visibly hampered by the surrounding chaos. She carried a tray laden with dirty dishes, her brow furrowed in concentration. her lips moving silently as if she was talking herself through the next task. She moved with a desperate urgency, a stark contrast to the languid pace of her colleagues. It was clear she was new, perhaps even newer than he was, and she was visibly struggling under the weight of the restaurant's negativity and a glaring lack of proper training. She accidentally bumped into another server, dropping a fork, and immediately bent down to retrieve it, murmuring apologies that went unheard or unacknowledged. She was overwhelmed, certainly, but she was trying, truly trying her best, and a flicker of admiration sparked within David for her sheer resilience. As Mark, David began his observations, his trained eye picking up on a myriad of subtle and not-so-subtle cues. The passive-aggressive behavior of the existing staff towards Sarah was particularly striking. He watched as seasoned waitresses deliberately left orders for the kitchen counter for her to pick up, even if it was out of her section, or gave her vague, unhelpful directions when she asked for assistance. "Just figure it out," one said with a dismissive wave, turning away before Sarah could ask her follow-up question. There was a palpable us versus them mentality, with them clearly being the new hires or anyone who dared to show a modicum of enthusiasm. The management, spearheaded by Gary, appeared to be either oblivious or complicit. Gary seemed more concerned with complaining about his long hours to anyone who would listen than actually managing the floor. Tables remained uncleared for too long, menus were sticky, and the overall impression was one of neglect. Customers were often left waiting, their patience visibly thinning with each passing minute. He overheard complaints about cold food, incorrect orders, and a general lack of attentiveness, all confirming the scathing reviews that had spurred his undercover mission. David felt a growing knot of unease in his stomach. The restaurant wasn't just underperforming. It was actively hostile to its own success, a self-sabotaging entity that was clearly being destroyed from the inside out, piece by painful piece. This was far worse than he had ever anticipated, and the depth of the problems he was uncovering was truly staggering. The relentless pace of the kitchen and dining room was a foreign country to David, a world away from the polished boardrooms and quiet strategy sessions he typically inhabited. As Mark, the new server, he found himself genuinely struggling. His carefully constructed backstory of having worked in a small family diner felt ludicrously thin against the backdrop of actual sweat-inducing service. He fumbled plates, mixed up orders, and constantly found himself a step behind, tripping over his own feet, a palpable sense of inadequacy washing over him. It was humbling, to say the least, and a stark reminder of how far removed he had become from the foundational elements of his own business. Each dropped fork felt like a personal affront, every spilled drink a public humiliation, despite the fact that no one else seemed to notice his novice mistakes amidst the general chaos. Through it all, Sarah, despite her own visible exhaustion and the relentless pressure she faced, emerged as an unexpected beacon of patience and kindness. She moved with an almost ethereal grace through the crowded aisles, her smile unwavering even when customers snapped or her colleagues ignored her pleas for help. When Mark clumsily dropped a tray of bread rolls, scattering them across the floor, it was Sarah who knelt beside him, silently helping him gather them, offering a reassuring pat on his back instead of the harsh reprimand he anticipated. "Don't worry about it. Everyone has those days," she had murmured, her voice soft but firm, a genuine warmth emanating from her that cut through the restaurant's cold atmosphere. She showed him shortcuts, patiently explained the arcane logic of the POS system, and even covered for him when he forgot a table's water refill for the third time. Her empathy was a stark contrast to the indifferent and often hostile environment, a small, flickering flame in the pervasive gloom. An unexpected bond began to form, forged in the shared trenches of low-wage servitude, a camaraderie that transcended their assumed roles. David, in his Mark persona, found himself genuinely appreciating her, a feeling that had been entirely absent towards any of his employees in a very long time. As the days turned into a blur of clattering dishes and hurried steps, David's frustration, initially directed at his own ineptitude, steadily shifted and intensified. He was a meticulous observer by nature, and his internal ledger of grievances against the golden spoon grew exponentially. He witnessed blatant inefficiencies that bordered on sabotage. Chefs deliberately overcooking expensive cuts of meat to avoid having to cook a second, fresh batch. Servers forgetting to clock out on their breaks, padding their hours. An almost cavalier attitude towards food waste, with entire untouched plates of perfectly good food being scraped into the bin because of minor plating errors. The disrespect from other staff members towards customers was appalling. Casual insults muttered under their breath. Eye rolls when a diner asked for something slightly off menu. But even more unsettling was the contempt they showed for each other. There was an undercurrent of resentment, backstabbing, and a complete absence of teamwork. He watched as seasoned waiters intentionally misinformed new hires, setting them up for failure. Each incident was a tiny shard of betrayal, confirming his deepest fears. His mental notes were no longer just about operational flaws. They were about a corporate culture that had rotted from the inside out, a culture he, as the owner, was ultimately responsible for. The realization settled heavily in his stomach, a bitter aftertaste to every meal. The most egregious offender, the central node of this toxic web, was undoubtedly the restaurant manager, a portly man named Arthur, whose years of service had apparently bred a sense of untouchable entitlement rather than competence. David had promoted Arthur years ago, trusting his loyalty and experience, a decision he now recognized as catastrophically misguided. Arthur displayed an almost impressive level of laziness, often found lounging in the back office, scrolling through his phone, while the dining room descended into chaos. He openly played favorites, showering praise and easier shifts on those who flattered him, while ruthlessly micromanaging and berating anyone who dared to question his authority or merely failed to catch his casual attention. New hires, especially, bore the brunt of his capricious temper. David had seen him actively undermine Sarah, assigning her the most demanding sections with the least support, then criticizing her performance when she inevitably faltered. He caught Arthur pocketing cash from the till, small amounts, but frequent enough to add up, dismissed as petty cash discrepancies in the daily reports. This wasn't merely mismanagement, it was deliberate sabotage and petty corruption. The problem, David realized with a jolt of cold certainty, did indeed start at the very top of the branch's hierarchy. Arthur was not just a symptom of the restaurant's decline. He was an active catalyst, poisoning the well from within. The longer David observed, the more his executive detachment evaporated, replaced by a simmering anger that threatened to burst through his carefully constructed disguise. He had come to fix a business, but he was discovering a deeper, more insidious rot that required not just a strategy shift, but a moral cleansing. The day began like any other, but quickly spiraled into a maelstrom of inefficiency and frustration, becoming the epitome of everything David had witnessed and despised. The lunch rush hit earlier and harder than anticipated, a perfect storm of understaffing and unpreparedness. Orders piled up in the kitchen, a chaotic symphony of shouting cooks and clanging pots, each dish emerging either burnt or undercooked, certainly never on time. In the front of the house, the scene was no less dire. Tables sat uncleared for far too long, their previous occupants' crumbs and forgotten napkins, silent accusations against the sluggish service. Customers, initially patient, grew visibly agitated, their murmurs escalating into outright complaints. One couple, after waiting 45 minutes for their appetizer, simply stood up and walked out, leaving a $20 bill on the table as a thinly veiled insult. Cold food, delivered to the wrong tables, became a recurring nightmare. David, as Mark, found himself running in circles, trying to placate increasingly irate diners while simultaneously battling a perpetually overwhelmed kitchen. Communication had completely broken down. Servers barked at each other, managers offered vague, unhelpful directions, and the entire restaurant felt like a ship taking on water, with no one capable of steering it to safety. Amidst this pandemonium, Sarah, usually a beacon of earnest effort, began to falter. She was everywhere at once, clearing tables, taking orders, refilling drinks, but there was only so much one person could do. Her movements, normally fluid and purposeful, became jerky, tinged with desperation. The pressure was immense, a tangible weight on every employee. Yet Arthur, their manager, remained conspicuously absent from the front lines, only emerging from his office to bark criticisms or blame, never to assist. Sarah, juggling a tray laden with food, navigated a particularly crowded aisle. A young child, darting unexpectedly from their seat, bumped into her. The tray wobbled precariously, and a plate of pasta destined for table 7 slipped from her grasp, crashing to the floor with a sickening shatter, splattering red sauce across the pristine white tiles. A collective gasp rippled through the immediate vicinity, followed by nervous whispers. Sarah froze, her face draining of color, eyes wide with a mixture of shock and sheer panic. It was a small, honest mistake, an accident that could have happened to anyone under such duress, yet it felt monumental in the suffocating atmosphere. Before Sarah could even begin to apologize or assess the damage, Arthur appeared, seemingly materializing from the shadows of his office, drawn by the sound of breaking crockery. His face was a mask of theatrical fury, completely devoid of understanding or empathy. He strode directly towards Sarah, his voice cutting through the restaurant's din, instantly silencing the lingering whispers. "Are you blind, waitress? Can't you see where you're going?" he boomed, utterly indifferent to the customers now staring. "That's another $10 wasted straight out of the restaurant's profit. Do you have any idea how many mistakes you've made today? You're a liability. One more stunt like this, and you're out. Do you understand?" He stood over her, his portly figure casting a menacing shadow, his voice dripping with venom, designed to humiliate and intimidate. Sarah visibly recoiled, her shoulders slumping, her previous energy completely sapped. Her eyes, usually so bright with determination, welled up, a single tear tracing a path through the flour dust on her cheek. She didn't respond, couldn't. The injustice of it all, the public shaming for an accidental mishap in a restaurant crumbling under Arthur's own mismanagement, was unbearable. David, watching the entire exchange unfold from behind a bus cart he was ostensibly emptying, felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. His hands instinctively clenched around the cart's handle, knuckles white. The anger, which had been simmering just beneath the surface for days, now threatened to boil over. Every fiber of his being screamed to intervene, to step forward and dismantle Arthur's toxic reign right then and there. He wanted to reveal his true identity, to unleash the full force of his authority and rectify this blatant abuse. But he couldn't. Not yet. His mission, his disguise, his carefully constructed plan, all hinged on him remaining Mark, the ordinary, slightly awkward new server. He had to maintain his cover, had to keep observing, no matter how much it pained him to see Sarah endure such cruelty. He forced himself to remain still, a silent, seething witness, his gaze fixed on Sarah. With her head bowed, her spirit seemingly crushed, Sarah began to slowly, painstakingly, gather the shattered ceramic and scattered pasta, her movements wooden. Arthur, satisfied with his public display of dominance, huffed dismissively and retreated back towards the sanctuary of his office, leaving Sarah isolated in the wreckage. The dining room, though quiet now, felt heavy with the lingering tension. David watched as Sarah finally scooped the last fragments into a dustpan. She clutched the dustpan and broom tightly, her body language radiating defeat. As she turned to walk towards the kitchen, her back to David, she mumbled something barely audible, a whisper swallowed by the general hum of the restaurant. Yet it cut through the noise and pierced David's carefully constructed composure. It was not a plea for help, nor was it a curse. It was a quiet, desperate declaration, uttered with such raw vulnerability that it stopped David cold, freezing him in place, every other thought vanishing from his mind. He heard the words clearly, despite their softness, and they resonated deep within him, changing everything. The words, "I need this," were barely a whisper, a fragile sigh escaping Sarah's lips as she turned away, her shoulders bowed under the unspoken weight of her manager's cruelty. But those 3 simple syllables, infused with such raw, unvarnished desperation, detonated within David's carefully constructed facade like a silent, powerful bomb. He froze, not physically, but internally, his entire perspective momentarily shattering and then reforming with startling clarity. Up until that point, his mission had been primarily an intellectual exercise, a strategic maneuver to dissect and resolve a complex business problem. He was an owner trying to save his investment, a CEO gathering data. He had seen the inefficiency, the waste, the mismanagement, and the toxic culture through the lens of profit and loss, of operational diagrams and organizational charts. But "I need this" ripped through that detached analytical framework, exposing the pulsing, vulnerable human core beneath. It wasn't just a job for Sarah, it was her lifeline. It wasn't merely a paycheck, it was sustenance, stability, a bulwark against an unseen struggle that David now understood must be immense. The restaurant in its present state was not just failing as a business, it was failing its people. People like Sarah who clung to it out of necessity, who invested their dwindling hope and energy into its chaotic shifts. Her quiet utterance was a stark, painful reminder that the consequences of his restaurant's decline extended far beyond financial statements and quarterly reports. They manifested in the public humiliation of a hard-working woman, in the fear gripping her heart as she contemplated losing the very means to survive. This moment, this profound empathy, elicited by a mere whisper, triggered a seismic internal shift in David. His simmering frustration, which had been directed at incompetent staff and a corrupt manager, now transmuted into something far more profound, a deep-seated responsibility and a fierce protectiveness. He was no longer just the millionaire owner in disguise, gathering evidence. He was Mark, the fellow server, who had witnessed her quiet bravery, her unwavering effort despite constant setbacks, and her desperate need. The line between his true identity and his adopted persona blurred, almost dissolving entirely. He saw Sarah not as a data point, an employee number, but as a person, a human being whose well-being was inextricably linked to the fortunes of his company. He realized, with a jolt that reverberated through his entire being, that his actions, or rather his inactions, had contributed to this very desperation. His detached management style, his reliance on reports and distant oversight, had allowed the rot to fester, creating an environment where individuals like Sarah were not just struggling, but were actively being crushed. The problems he had come to solve suddenly had faces, names, and heartbreaking stories. The concept of fixing the business broadened exponentially. It wasn't just about restoring profitability or improving customer reviews. It was about creating a sanctuary, a fair and respectful workplace where people like Sarah could earn a living with dignity, without fear of arbitrary dismissal or public shaming. A new perspective settled over him, heavy and undeniable. The issues plaguing the Golden Spoon were not merely operational malfunctions. They were deeply personal wounds inflicted upon his employees. His initial objective had been purely strategic: identify flaws, eliminate waste, boost revenue. Now, however, a new, more urgent mandate emerged: protect his people. He understood that true leadership wasn't just about maximizing shareholder value. It was about fostering an environment where every employee, especially the most vulnerable, felt valued and secure. He saw the resilience in Sarah's slumped shoulders, the quiet strength in her quick retreat to compose herself, and it ignited a fierce resolve within him. He wasn't just going to fix his business. He was going to mend a broken culture, stitch together a fractured team, and perhaps, in doing so, protect the futures of individuals like Sarah who needed this more than he could ever have imagined. The weight of his impending actions, of the decisions he would soon make, felt heavier, more consequential, now that he truly grasped the human element at stake. His path forward was now illuminated by the quiet desperation of 3 whispered words. David, now more determined than ever, continued his undercover investigation, his mark persona becoming a crucial tool for deeper insight. The raw vulnerability of Sarah's "I need this" had reshaped his entire perspective, transforming a business problem into a deeply personal mission. He now moved through the bustling kitchen and chaotic dining room with a heightened sense of purpose, no longer just observing, but actively seeking out the root causes of the restaurant's systemic failures. He meticulously documented every procedural lapse, every instance of waste, every moment of staff mistreatment, not with the detached eye of an owner, but with the visceral understanding of someone living through it. He learned to subtly elicit information from disgruntled colleagues, nodding empathetically as they vented about Arthur's unfairness, all the while cataloging their complaints. He discovered that inventory mismanagement was rampant, with supplies often expiring on shelves due to poor rotation, and some even suspected items were being siphoned off for personal use. His interactions with Sarah became more frequent, blossoming from initial mutual support into a genuine, if still guarded, camaraderie. During their brief, snatched moments during breaks or after shifts, usually while nursing aching feet and recounting the day's absurdities, Mark learned more about her life. The fragments came together to paint a stark picture of resilience against overwhelming odds. She was indeed a single mother, her days a relentless cycle of early mornings, school drop-offs, multiple jobs, and late-night pickups from a friend who helped babysit. Her child, a bright-eyed little girl named Lily, suffered from a rare respiratory condition that required expensive medication and frequent specialist visits, none of which were fully covered by her meager insurance. Every extra shift Sarah picked up, every dollar she earned was earmarked for Lily's care, a relentless race against time and mounting medical bills. The pressure she lived under was immense, a constant anxiety hum beneath her usually calm demeanor. She spoke of her dreams for Lily, of wanting to provide a stable, healthy life, far removed from the constant worry that shadowed her own existence. David listened, a knot forming in his stomach, realizing that for Sarah, this job, this often thankless, grueling job, was not just a means to an end, but the very lifeline tethering her and her child to hope. It wasn't about profit margins or market share. It was about Lily's next breath, her next dose of medicine. This deeper understanding of Sarah's plight solidified David's resolve, transforming his purpose from merely fixing a failing business into protecting a vulnerable human being and her child. His anger at Arthur intensified, layered now with a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed. He made several attempts to subtly challenge Arthur's poor decisions or offer more efficient solutions, always through the guise of Mark, the observant new server. During a particularly chaotic dinner rush, when Arthur was nowhere to be found, David, acting as Mark, tried to streamline the order flow, suggesting a more logical table assignment for the servers. Arthur, upon his eventual reappearance, merely scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Stick to your section, new guy. I've been running this place for 15 years. I think I know how it works." Another time, David, noticing a significant amount of perfectly good food being thrown out due to incorrect portioning, cautiously approached Arthur. "Arthur, maybe we could train the kitchen staff to use standard scoops. It would cut down on waste and save us money." Arthur had just leaned back in his office chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "That's why I hired you, Mark, for your brilliant ideas. Or wait, no, I hired you to carry plates. Get back to it." The dismissive tone, the mocking condescension, reinforced everything David had already observed. Arthur wasn't just incompetent, he was actively resistant to any form of improvement or change that didn't originate from his own lazy authority. He saw suggestions for efficiency not as solutions, but as challenges to his already fragile power. He seemed to thrive on the chaos, perhaps because it allowed him to deflect blame and maintain his position through sheer bluster and intimidation. David also noted Arthur's subtle but consistent sabotage of the online ordering system, intentionally letting orders pile up or accidentally marking them as delivered before they even left the kitchen, leading to a cascade of negative reviews. He saw Arthur altering timesheets, crediting extra hours to favored staff while shaving minutes off others. Each incident was a small but steady drip, eroding the already fragile foundations of the restaurant. David realized that Arthur's incompetence was so deeply ingrained, so intrinsically linked to his sense of self-preservation and control, that any direct confrontation as Mark was futile. It would only lead to more ridicule, more dismissal. His anger simmered, but he kept it carefully contained, knowing that his true identity and the power it wielded would soon be unleashed. The evidence he was gathering was overwhelming, irrefutable. It wasn't just about financial losses anymore. It was about a human ecosystem being poisoned by a single, malignant presence. His initial plan to simply fix the restaurant had evolved into a fierce resolve to reclaim it, not just for his business empire, but for the Sarahs of the world who desperately needed a fair chance, a stable environment, and a workplace free from arbitrary cruelty. The patience required to maintain his disguise was immense, but the vision of Lily's hopeful eyes, relayed through Sarah's tired voice, fueled his every restrained action. He knew the time for the pretense of Mark was rapidly drawing to a close, and the moment for David, the owner, to emerge was almost upon him. Every hidden note, every observed transgression, was a piece of the puzzle he was meticulously assembling for the inevitable reckoning. David had meticulously pieced together the fragments of evidence, each observation a damning indictment of the failing system under Arthur's negligent watch. The full picture was now horrifyingly clear, far worse than any quarterly report could ever convey. He had watched Arthur steal from the company through petty schemes, sabotage staff morale with his toxic attitude, and actively drive away loyal customers with his indifference. More tragically, David had seen firsthand how Arthur's mismanagement directly impacted the lives of dedicated employees like Sarah, who clung to their jobs with desperate tenacity despite the abysmal working conditions. The time for observation was over. The time for decisive action had arrived. He spent his evenings, after grueling shifts, as Mark hunched over his laptop in his nondescript rental apartment, transforming his mental notes into a comprehensive, actionable plan. This wasn't merely about firing a bad manager, it was about systemic reform. The plan encompassed everything from detailed operational improvements, staff training protocols, customer service initiatives, to a complete overhaul of the restaurant's internal communication channels. He envisioned a new golden spoon, one that truly reflected the quality and values he had poured into his empire. The first and most crucial step involved the immediate removal of Arthur, a surgical extraction to stop the bleeding. But beyond that, David aimed for a complete cultural shift, fostering an environment of respect, efficiency, and genuine hospitality. He outlined new incentive programs, fair scheduling practices, and a clear pathway for employee feedback, all the things Arthur had systematically dismantled. His last few shifts as Mark were charged with a quiet intensity. He moved with a new sense of purpose, not just observing, but solidifying his resolve, savoring the feeling of being intimately connected to the very roots of his business. He covertly confirmed a few more details, the exact timings of the inventory deliveries Arthur was pilfering, the precise moments he would deliberately misplace reservation slips for regular customers, creating chaos at the hostess stand. Each confirming instance fueled David's determination. He knew the resistance he would face, not just from Arthur, but potentially from other long-term staff who had grown comfortable with the dysfunctional status quo. Yet, the image of Sarah's tired but resolute face, the memory of her whispered, "I need this," burned brightly in his mind, overriding any lingering doubts. On what would be his final night as Mark, the restaurant was, predictably, a mess. A Saturday evening rush had descended, and Arthur was nowhere to be found for the better part of an hour, supposedly taking an important call in his office, leaving the skeleton crew to drown in orders and complaints. David, channeling Mark's persona, moved through the chaos with a practiced ease he hadn't possessed weeks prior. He helped clear tables, ran food, even bussed dishes when the lone busboy was overwhelmed. He found himself gravitating towards Sarah, sharing quiet, knowing glances amidst the storm. They were comrades in the trenches, bound by unspoken understanding. As the late hours dwindled and the restaurant began to empty, Sarah and Mark found themselves wiping down tables in the quieter back section. The fatigue was etched on Sarah's face, but her shoulders, David noticed, carried a new resilience, perhaps knowing the shift was almost over. He paused, leaning against a booth, a clean rag in his hand. "You know," he began, his voice softer than usual, "you're really good at this, Sarah. You push through no matter what." She offered a small, weary smile. "Got to. It's what we do, right? You're not so bad yourself, Mark. You picked it up quick." He managed a slight shrug. "Learned from the best, I guess." He wanted to tell her everything, to reveal the truth, to promise her a better future. But not yet. The revelation needed to be impactful, precise, and on his terms. This humble moment, this shared camaraderie, was for Mark. "Listen," David continued, his gaze drifting around the emptying restaurant, taking in the worn booths, the chipped paint, the lingering smell of stale grease. He imprinted the image in his mind, for comparison to the gleaming future he envisioned. "Whatever happens, keep pushing, and don't ever let anyone tell you you're not valuable." Sarah looked at him, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, caught off guard by the unexpected intensity in his voice. "Thanks, Mark. That means a lot, actually. You too. Hope everything works out for you." He offered her a genuine smile, a mix of gratitude and anticipation bubbling within him. "Oh, it will, for both of us, soon, very soon." He wished her good night, a final lingering nod, then clocked out, leaving the golden spoon as Mark for the very last time. The weight of the disguise, which had been both a burden and a protective shield, lifted as he stepped out into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered, reflecting his own heightened sense of purpose. He had walked into that restaurant as a millionaire disconnected from his own enterprise, and he was leaving as a man profoundly reconnected, armed with empathy and a blueprint for redemption. The quiet satisfaction of his undercover mission was immense, but it was overshadowed by the impending storm, the dramatic unveiling that would shake the golden spoon to its foundations. He imagined Sarah's face, the moment she would realize the awkward new hire, the quiet confidant, was actually the owner. The thought sent a jolt of nervous excitement through him. Tomorrow, the transformation would begin. Tomorrow, David would return. The morning light, stark and unforgiving, illuminated David's face as he walked through the familiar doors of the Golden Spoon, no longer Mark, but the owner, resolute and perfectly composed. He felt a profound sense of purpose, a quiet storm brewing within him. The air in the restaurant usually thrummed with a low, chaotic hum, but today it was tense, hushed, as the morning staff gathered, their faces a mix of confusion and apprehension. Arthur, the manager, stood at the front, attempting a confident posture, though a flicker of unease danced in his eyes as David's gaze met his. David didn't waste a second. His voice, calm yet authoritative, cut through the silence. He didn't shout, he didn't grandstand, he simply stated the facts. He revealed his true identity, the undercover mission, and the comprehensive evidence he had meticulously gathered. The ripple of shock that went through the room was palpable. Faces blanched, whispers erupted, and some staff members exchanged terrified glances. Arthur, however, grew pale, his forced bravado crumbling as David laid out the detailed account of his misconduct. The altered timesheets, the sabotaged online orders, the dismissive treatment of staff, the deliberate fostering of a toxic environment. "Arthur," David stated, his voice devoid of emotion, "your employment with the Golden Spoon, and indeed with my entire organization, is terminated, effective immediately. Your actions have not only jeopardized this business, but have also created an unacceptable and hostile workplace for dedicated individuals." Arthur stammered, attempting to protest, to deny, but David merely raised a hand, silencing him. Security, discreetly positioned, escorted a now furious and humiliated Arthur from the premises, his angry muttering fading down the hall. A collective sigh, almost imperceptible, seemed to sweep through the room. David then turned his attention to the remaining staff, his expression softening slightly. He spoke of his initial disappointment, of the frustration that had led him to this drastic measure. He acknowledged their struggles, the difficult conditions many of them had endured under Arthur's mismanagement. He spoke of the restaurant's potential, of his vision for a place where everyone felt valued, where hard work was rewarded, and where every customer experience was exceptional. He outlined his immediate plans, a comprehensive retraining program, not just for new hires but for everyone, focusing on customer service, operational efficiency, and teamwork. He announced significant investments in upgrading kitchen equipment, improving the ordering system, and enhancing the overall aesthetics of the restaurant to create a more welcoming atmosphere for both staff and patrons. He promised clear communication channels, a fair review process, and a commitment to fostering a positive, supportive work environment. "I made a mistake by becoming too detached," David confessed, his gaze sweeping over their faces. "And for that, I apologize. But I am back now, and things will change. This isn't just about profit. It's about people. It's about building a team we can all be proud of." Sarah stood amongst the stunned employees, her face a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. The realization hit her like a wave. Mark, the awkward, kind, sometimes clumsy new server, was David, the owner. Her mind replayed countless moments, his quiet observations, his subtle attempts to help, his genuine concern when she was at her lowest. A flush of embarrassment washed over her, followed quickly by an overwhelming sense of relief and gratitude. She felt tears welling in her eyes, not of sadness, but of a hope she hadn't dared to entertain in months. After his address, David sought her out, his gaze finding her in the crowd. "Sarah," he said, her name sounding different on his lips without the Mark pretense. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" He led her to a quieter corner. "I owe you a profound apology, Sarah," he began, his voice earnest. "Working alongside you, seeing your dedication, your compassion, your sheer resilience, it taught me more than any boardroom meeting ever could. You said, 'I need this,' and I understood then that this business was about more than numbers." Sarah, still processing the shock, could only nod, tears silently tracing paths down her cheeks. "I need people like you at the heart of this restaurant," David continued, a genuine smile gracing his features. "Your empathy, your work ethic, your natural leadership, they are invaluable. I would like to offer you the position of assistant manager. We will provide you with the training, the support, and the compensation you deserve. You would be instrumental in helping us rebuild this team, in shaping the new golden spoon." Sarah was stunned. Assistant manager? It was more than she could have ever dreamed of. A lifeline for her and Lily. "Mr. David," she choked out, I don't know what to say. Thank you so much." The weight that had been crushing her for so long suddenly lifted, replaced by a surge of overwhelming relief and possibility. Over the next few months, the Golden Spoon underwent a remarkable transformation. The old, cynical atmosphere was gradually replaced by one of genuine camaraderie and efficiency. Staff retraining sessions, led by newly appointed managers and external consultants, reinforced best practices and fostered a culture of mutual respect. David personally oversaw many of these changes, ensuring that his vision was not just implemented, but truly embraced. He spent less time in his high-rise office and more time on the restaurant floor, not as Mark, but as an engaged, accessible leader. Customer reviews began to soar. The food quality improved dramatically, service became impeccable, and the once negative buzz surrounding the Golden Spoon faded, replaced by glowing testimonials. It wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It became a vibrant community hub, a testament to what empathetic leadership could achieve. Sarah, excelling in her new role, was a beacon of the new Golden Spoon. Her calm demeanor, her compassion for her colleagues, and her unwavering dedication helped to cement the positive changes. She thrived, proving David's judgment correct, her daughter Lily benefiting immensely from the stability and improved prospects her mother now enjoyed. The golden spoon, once a failing relic, transformed into a shining example across David's entire restaurant chain. It became a model for how a business could not only recover from mismanagement but flourish by putting its people first. David learned a profound lesson. True leadership isn't about being distant and authoritative. It's about getting close enough to understand the human heartbeat of your business, to see beyond the balance sheets into the lives of the people who make it all possible. Sometimes, the most valuable insights aren't found in market reports, but in the quiet, desperate words of a struggling waitress, revealing that the true essence of success lies in empathy and the unwavering commitment to uplifting those who carry the weight of your dreams. The golden spoon, once tarnished, now shined brighter than ever, a beacon of hope and a symbol of a leader who rediscovered his purpose, not just in profit, but in people.